When I first come into a company, my instinct is it's always the fucking same. I look at everything and immediately think that could be better. This could be better. That could be better. And honestly, a lot of the time it is 100% true. But I realized something recently that completely changed how I approach improving systems. If you change everything at once, you can almost make it impossible to know what's working and what isn't. And that's, what I'm learning. One of the fastest ways to accidentally break a system that was already producing results, right? If you're someone who likes, building systems and optimizing processes and just improving and contributing to the betterment of an organization, it's very easy to walk into an organization and immediately see opportunities for improvement everywhere. Like everywhere, right? You notice like the scripts could be stronger. This process could be cleaner, right? Operational systems that could be more efficient. So the natural reaction is to want to rebuild everything immediately, especially if you're someone like me who likes moving at high speeds operationally. But that instinct can create not only a serious business problem for the organization, but also for like the morale of the team, which was in the previous videos. This video is about the organization, right? So if you completely overhaul multiple parts of a system at the same time, something critical disappears and you end up losing your baseline. For example, imagine a company already has several client-facing systems in place. They have an onboarding call that gets clients onboarded. They have a kickoff call that starts the engagement, and then they have business development strategy sessions that help clients move forward. Now, are these systems perfect? No, they absolutely fucking are not. I've noticed that the first day I walked in here. Okay, not the first day, but like within a couple of weeks, right? In fact, you look closely enough, you might see plenty of ways to improve them, like an overwhelming amount of ways. And really, that's going to happen with any business, right? Because if there weren't ways to fucking improve a company, it would be at $1 billion fucking dollars, right? So there is one fact that does matter with where the company currently is at, though. Everything that's in place there, it is producing results already. If it's producing results already. If it's not, then fuck this video and completely rehaul the whole company. But the company I work with, we do $1 million a month. So if a company is generating something like $1 million per month, the systems are working well enough to sustain that outcome if that outcome is being provided from the systems that are currently in place. That's that, regardless of how I feel about it, right? They're providing a functional starting point, right? We call that the baseline, and that is incredibly valuable. And I didn't really take that into consideration, and maybe you could gather that from the previous videos that I made, okay? Because I was fucking pissed. But the best way to think about this really is like an elimination diet, okay? If someone is trying to figure out what food is making them feel sick, so they stop eating everything, and to try to find out what's making them feel sick, normally they would just eat one thing at a time, right? Just have this one food for the day, see if any irritations come up, right? But if they just start eating all the shit that they were eating, right? And they feel terrible afterwards, they won't know what fucking caused it. So instead, to really follow the elimination diet properly, they introduce things one variable at a time. That way, when something changes, they can identify exactly what produced the result. So improving business systems can work the same way. If you rewrite the onboarding call, restructure the kickoff process, redesign strategy sessions, and change the entire client journey at the same time, something breaks and you won't know why. And you lose the ability to trace cause and effect inside of a business setting. So what I'm starting to realize is that the most effective way to improve systems is through a simple loop. You make a change, you implement it, you get feedback, and then you repeat it, right? Make a change, implement it, get feedback, repeat it. You do that over and over again. Instead of trying to redesign like an entire process from A to Z, you focus on making A, right, as strong as possible first. For example, imagine you're using, you're trying to improve a call that uses 5 deck slides, right? Okay. Or 5 parts of a framework, right? Instead of rewriting like the entire call structure, you might just change like one slide or one pillar in the framework. And then you run that version for 10 calls, maybe even 100 calls. And you listen carefully to how people respond, right? If you're a manager, but if you're the one experiencing it like me, I get real-time feedback. I don't need I don't have a team, that I'm managing and then I'm getting feedback through them, which can create a completely different experience. I much prefer this to do it myself and hear live the feedback, right? Because you're going to gather feedback and then you adjust again. So small changes tested repeatedly repeatedly create much more reliable improvements than massive redesigns, right? And it really depends where the company is at. A massive redesign might be 100% needed, but I'm now realizing the point of friction for me and where I come into businesses, at least for this business, previous business that I did this at, we weren't making any money. So it very much needed a complete rehaul. This company is doing $1 million a month, right? They're profitable. Previous company was not profitable. So that was actually a much more needed scenario for a complete rehaul, okay? But anyways, we're talking about the current company, okay? So another important realization is that there are two forces constantly interacting when building systems, okay? And I want you to look at them as like a cable, and then you splice the cable, and then you unwind it, and you see these threads start to come undone, right? There's two threads, okay? One is the theory in your mind, right? All the changes you believe could actually improve the system, right? And this could not be theory. This could be actuality. It's not a theory. It's like, hey, we need to make this change, but it's unapplied. So it's theory in that sense, right? The other is the experience that you're actually having in the real world. So how clients respond, how calls actually flow, what people understand or misunderstand. So these are the two threads, okay? One is the changes you want to make. The other thread is the experience that you're observing, okay? And as time, which is not a thread, time is the continuum in which the thread is interweaving itself together, right? So as time moves forward, these two threads wrap around each other like strands in a cable. So you have, right, the theory, and then you have the experience you're having, and then they thread, and then this motion of moving forward is time, okay? So theory informs the next experiment, and experience reveals what actually works. And through that process, the system slowly becomes stronger. The mistake that many people make, including myself, is overloading theory. Spend a lot of time imagining every possible improvement. I even just did this on the call with Phil, where we're doing a little dive into his e-commerce business, right? And I'm like, I don't know why. My brain just fucking goes from A to Z. I just go, we can improve all of this. Like I start, because I'm like, okay, what happens here? What happens here? And my brain, it's just like, this can be improved, this can be improved, this can be, and even, it might have been too much. I don't know if it was, but it's just like, I'm like, okay, let's do this. And it's just like, I can't do that in the client journey, right? Because, right, like at the end of the day, off script here, what's his name? BJ Fogg, or the behavior engineer, right? He's like, there's two things that create everlasting permanent change. One is environment, and then the other is something so small enough that it's impossible not to do it, okay? Now, we are changing their environment by putting them in a new setting, but how can we give them a double whammy? I don't want to give you just one, right? Because if both create that, why don't I just give you both, and then I have a higher likelihood that you have everlasting permanent behavior change, right? That's the goal for client success. We're changing your behavior so you can get X outcome, because at the end of the day, if you're coming to us and you don't have X outcome, that means your behavior needs to change. That's the only thing, okay? I'm not going to be fucking Jiddu Krishnamurti and Peter Crone and fucking enlighten you in 4 months. That's just not going to happen, okay? So what can we really control in 4 months? Your behavior, okay? So with that being said, I cannot, I'm very aware of this, I overload. I cannot do this with clients, and do not do this with clients, because they're in a new environment, which is great for behavior change. But now, if they're with us for 120 days, and the way our cadence is set up is we have bi-weekly. So we have 2 a month, so there's 4 months, so there's 8 calls where we get to really check in on behavior. Now, there's obviously 2 check-ins a week, right? There's Looms I can send them. There's, a video page of frequently asked questions and shit like that I can really help them with other shit and whatnot. So it's not just, right, those aren't the only windows of behavioral change that can be applied, right? But back to the script, okay? So the mistake that I make is overloading on theory, spending a lot of time imagining every possible improvement and then redesigning everything in my head. And then that's, when it's finally the time to actually implement the change, I try to deploy the entire redesign at once. And that's when it can be very overwhelming for people. I like the overwhelm, right? I love like drinking from a fire hose and just like throwing myself into the deep end and drowning and then eventually coming up for air, right? Once I can figure out how to tread water. I like that. It makes me feel like I'm progressing, right? Because I like extreme results. And to get extreme results, you have to have extreme behavior. I don't use the word extreme, right? That's just how I like to live my life. So that's not extreme. That's my baseline. So, but that's when things can crash and burn, okay? Organizationally, right? Individually might be different, but organizationally, because when too many variables change at the same time, reality can start to become unpredictable. And once the system breaks, it becomes very difficult to actually diagnose the cause, okay? So improving systems is not about how many ideas you have, and it isn't about how quickly you can redesign everything. It's about maintaining adaptability while still being able to test ideas in the real world. And that's really the delicate balance, right? Because I primarily specialized in taking companies from $0 to $500,000 a month in like 6 months or less. Now I'm kind of stepping up into, it's not the big leagues, but it's a step up for me based off of my experience, where it's $1 million to $2 million a month. And it's exciting because I'm seeing the amount of improvement that can still be made. I was like, fuck, I'm not sure how I'm going to be able to improve this, which was so naive and ignorant of me, because it's like, they're not doing $1 billion a month, right? Like there's plenty of ways I can fucking improve this company. You know what I'm saying? So there's kind of like a spectrum where 0 to $500,000, there's a lot more flexibility, right? And a lot more, pace at which you can operationally implement. And then the more you go, the more you grow, I start to see this slowly scales back, right? Now, not appropriately, right? It usually scales back in a negative manner, where it's like it could be faster than it is. So that is a pattern that I am seeing with higher level companies, is they are not as operationally flexible as they could be, right? They kind of slowed down, right? At least with where they're at. Now, if you're at $1 billion company, sure, can you make these changes that I'm making inside of a company from 0 to $500,000 in 6 months? Probably not. Not at the speed that I make them at, right? Because that's a quick change. But for $1 billion company, that's a much taller structure. So it's like, you move one Jenga block and you're shaking the stability of the whole organization, right? And it could collapse. But at 0 to 500, there is no foundation, right? So it's like, it's wild, wild fucking west, which is what I love, because like you get to wear multiple hats, you get to have multiple scopes of responsibility, and you get to really just you're not sales, you're sales and marketing, you're client fulfillment. You're like really just trying to get okay, let's do tech, let's do systems, it's awesome. You get to be a generalist rather than a specialist. And then usually the more the company grows, it starts to become more of a specialist than a generalist. So generalists will get it up, and then specialists will take it further. And then usually, at least, from what I've seen, that's where the CEO kind of steps in as the generalist, rather than having 5 generalists. You kind of just have 5 very entry-level CEOs operating, and then boom, it gets to, $500,000 a month. But anyways, from my experience. So make a change, observe what happens, learn the feedback, and then adjust again. And then over time, theory and experience weave together. And that's how real optimization works, not through massive redesigns unless necessary, right? But through small improvements tested across time.